Okay, so country steel bends. The most important place to start with all of this is with your triads. Here's a C major triad, string set 1, root, 3rd, 5th. The inversion of that goes 3rd, 5th, root. Inversion of that, 5th, root, 3rd. Already you can hear some good twangy potential with these things. Okay, so I'd recommend learning those on all of your string sets. Be really thorough about it. Okay, so next we're going to look at some cool little tricks we can do within each of these basic triad shapes on string set 1. So we'll start with the root position, root, 3rd, 5th. Essentially these 3 notes are now going to become target notes that we're going to try and bend into from another scale note. So let's start on the G string, drop that a semitone. Now we have the major 7th, we can bend that a semitone higher to get back to our triad, our root note. Combine that with the note on the B string in the triad, and you get that beautiful bend. Bring the top string in. Okay, so next we're going to look at the B string. Here's the major 3rd, this is our target note. We're going to bend into that from the 2nd degree of the scale. So a whole tone bend. Combine that with the top note of the triad. Another great bend. Another one I like to do here is to take the top 2 strings of your triad, that's your 3rd and your 5th, bend the 3rd up a semitone to a sus4 and then release back. Okay, next shape, first inversion. Okay, we're going to start on the major 3rd. Again, we're going to look at bending into that from a whole tone below, just like we did down here. This time it's on the G string. Again, we're going to combine it with the next note of your triad. So these are the 2 targets. You can combine the top string with that as well. Okay, next we're on to the B string from this shape. We're going to bend this up a whole tone and then release back down. So we're ending up back on the triad. Pretty cool. We've also got the G string sus4 trick we did down here. Again, you can combine the top string now. Beautiful. Second inversion. Let's take the top 2 strings, drop the root a semitone, major 7th, just like the first trick we learned, and combine that with your next note up in the triad and do a half bend. Beautiful. Okay, so next, on the G string within that shape, we're going to bend that note up a whole tone and bring it back down. Combine it with the root from the shape. Really pretty again, beautiful stuff. Okay, so let's try finding some middle ground between some of these things. Let's take this last one we learned. We can keep the little finger, drop the G string a whole tone down to the 10th fret, and then drop it a semitone down to the 3rd part of your previous shape. So we're kind of blending second inversion shape and first inversion. So switching between the different triads gives you all sorts of different possibilities, different tones, different sounds. Okay, so the next challenge is to put this in some kind of musical context. So let's take the typical 1-4-5 type of progression. We're in the key of C. So 1 is C, 4 is F, 5 is G, back to the 1. It's important to be aware of chord function, knowing that the C and the F, if they were to take any extension, it would be a major 7th on those, or a 6th, or a 9th, or that kind of thing. But the G, because it's the 5 chord, that's where we have the flattened 7th. Really important to know that. We're going to adapt some of those earlier licks specifically for the 5 chord by dropping the 7 down a semitone further. Okay, so let's move some of these ideas to F. Your triads now. All the same shapes, all the same moves within them. So I'd really recommend spending a lot of time with that kind of stuff. Okay, so on to the 5 chord, the G. We're going to start off with all the same shapes. Again, the 5 chord is a dominant 7th chord typically. When we add anything to it, we're looking to add a flat 7, not a natural 7. So that would impact some of the licks that we've played. For example, let's take the second inversion. Unlike the C and the F, where we could drop the root note a semitone down and bend in, because this is G and it's the 5, we have to drop it a whole tone to the flat 7. Just bear in mind that essentially we're staying within the C major scale for all of this. And C major scale has an F, it doesn't have an F sharp. So the major 7th wouldn't work on the G, but the dominant 7th will. So we're going to bend in from the flat 7. Let me show you some more examples that really bring out the sound of the flat 7. You've got this triad here, the root position. Again, instead of dropping the root down a semitone to the wrong 7 in this case, we're dropping it a semitone further to the dominant. You have to figure out a way to bend that. Okay, what about if we were playing, let's see, back in first inversion. This is something I like to do actually. Bring in the flat 7 on the B string, bend the G string. So we're almost thinking G blues scale. But just resolve it back to your triad, the major 3rd and the 5th. Sounds cool actually, keeping that flat 7 on top. I love that. Okay, so another thing we can do is we can reuse a couple of the F ideas over the G7. If you think about the logic behind that, the F is the flat 7 of the G, so it kind of makes sense. So you could do a G, drop into G7, resolve into C, for example. Okay, so some extra tricks on the G7. Because the 5 chord is where you get all the interesting stuff happening, you're adding all that beautiful tension onto it. I always find it's useful to have extra tricks up your sleeve for this one. Again, so going back to triads, if we imagine that you've got all your triads down on all of your string sets. String set 3 is a really useful one. This is the G, the D, and the A strings. Let's take a G major triad here. Basically looks like a good old open E chord. It's come out of the water, onto the land. Now you've got a G major. Okay, so let's say you drop the middle note a whole tone. You've got this really great dominant 7th. 5th, flat 7, 3rd. Now you can bend the G string a semitone. Can take a bit of getting used to some of this stuff. You have to find the right thumb position for it. Let's take that idea along the fretboard. Imagine you're on this G major triad. Again, the same 3 strings. The root, the 3rd, the 5th. Drop the root a whole tone. And then you can bend the G string a whole tone. That's a great one. Then the final one would be, this would be taken from this kind of a shape, the Hendrixy triad thing. That's the third, the fifth and the root. Bring in the flat 7 on the D string, so you're at the 15th fret on that string, and bend the G string a whole tone again. Pretty cool. And that's all just to express the sound of a G7. It's going to want to resolve you to a C at some point. One more trick I'll show you for the G7 for now. This is one I picked up off Jim Campolongo. Imagine a G7 resolving onto a C, so that's the 5 going to the 1. Let's take this shape here, kind of, well, it is an E minor triad, but if we're thinking of this as a G7, there's the third, there's the root, here's a 6, you can bend it a semitone up to the 7. Hold that bend, slide the first finger up a semitone, release the bend, and now you've got your C major triad. Beautiful. Now, one final point is that there are other places where we can bring in that dominant 7th sound. Think about when you're going from a C to an F. You can treat the C momentarily as if it's the 5 of F. So you can play a sequence that is essentially outlining the changes of C, C7 to F. Which means we get chance briefly to throw in all those G7 tricks, but for a C7 chord. So again, you want to move those things around and really get to know them. Okay, so that's what I would regard as really important foundational knowledge for playing in this sort of a style, or any style really. You know, knowing your triads is one of the most important things. It's one of your 5 a day, essentially. But let's move on to a bit of the tone stuff. But I really do implore you to spend a lot of time on your triads, getting to know them, because you've got to be able to move these things around quickly in the moment, in any key, and be expressive with it and improvise within these ideas. Okay, so let's say that we've got those triads down, everything's feeling pretty good. Tonally, you want to be trying to hybrid pick a lot of these things for that typical kind of country sound. Hybrid picking, I'm sure you already know, but just to go over the basics. If you're using the top 3 strings, you'd have the plectrum picking the G string, your middle finger picking the B, and your third finger picking the top E. You can move that between the different string sets. Okay, next step, tone. Bridge pickup works really well for this sort of thing. You kind of need the extra bite and cut of a bridge pickup if you want to do really effective volume swells. What I do, I've run through an old Fender Deluxe Reverb from 1969, beautiful amp, but it doesn't have a lot of mid-range character. It's quite, sparkly on the top, good sort of solid low end, but not a lot happening in the mids. To help the mids cut a little more, I just run a clone type of effect into it. It's not a legit clone, but it's a good clone of it. It's made by a guy called Decibelix, called the Golden Horse. I just run it with the gain slightly up. With that pedal, as you add gain, you add a lot of mid-range character. So I'm putting the gain up enough that it doesn't really sound like you're adding any distortion, but you're just bringing some mids back in. It also just sort of narrows the sound a little bit, gets rid of a bit of low end, gets rid of a bit of top end, which is great for these volume swells. Okay, so as far as volume swells go, you want to practice first of all just shutting the volume off in one quick movement, because you'll have just played a note. You're then going to want to get rid of the volume before swelling it back in for your next note. So the way I think of it, I kind of cut the volume off as I'm about to strike the string for the next note. And when you bring the volume back in, you want to do it sort of evenly, not a sudden movement. So really your hand is doing this kind of thing. Chopping down really fast and then bringing back in slower. Helps to have a good taper on the volume pot. I just like them to be nice and even. I remember reading about Danny Gatton going and buying like 20 pots and swapping them out to find the best taper for volume swells. I can see some merit in doing that for sure. But as with most things, really it's not about gear, it's about practice and technique. You've got to really put time into this stuff, and you've got to be a perfectionist about it. You've got to be able to conceptualize what you want to hear and then reach that goal so that it sounds exactly how you hear it, if that makes sense. Listen to a lot of old country records, listen to a lot of Jim Campolongo, Duke Levine, Danny Gatton, Roy Buchanan. All these guys were masters of this stuff. Also make sure to check out all the old classic pedal steel players, you know, Buddy Emmons, Don Helms, Lloyd Green and such. You know, these guys are incredible players, and if you can conceptualize that sound in your head, you can easily get it coming out of your fingers. Oh yeah, one final point about bending and all of that stuff. Sometimes you want your bends gradual, sometimes you want them mechanical, where they're either there or they're not. Just to give you those different flavors of pedal steel styles. Also get used to adding a lot of vibrato on top of your bends. And do a lot of sort of double bends. I like to use this sort of sound a lot. Right, well I guess that about covers it for now. I hope you've enjoyed this video. This is my first time doing this sort of thing, so I intend to keep at it and keep improving, make things more succinct, more tidy. But I've enjoyed it, and I hope you've enjoyed watching. I really want this place to become a community of like-minded musicians. So please do comment down below with any questions or suggestions. If you're into jazz, country, blues, folk, rock and roll, alternative music, you know, anything with good guitar playing in, this is a good place to be. We're going to keep it diverse. We're going to do a good mixture of teaching and performance videos, some gear videos as well, maybe some reviews of some vintage stuff that I've got. Please do stick around and subscribe, comment, share, like, all that stuff. It makes such a big difference. I mean, it's so easy for channels nowadays to just quickly disappear into obscurity. And I really do have big plans for this place. You know, I want to make this a hub where we can all learn together and get some interesting discussions going. Okay, so thanks for watching, and I'll see you soon.